Though George Harrison had long been content, standing quietly at the back of the stage, his brilliance as a songwriter had grown too large to be contained behind John Lennon and Paul McCartney. As the Beatles began to unravel, it was clear that Harrison's creative fire could no longer be dimmed. When All Things Must Pass finally arrived, it wasn't just a debut, it was an explosion. Proof that the quiet Beatle had plenty to say once he was free from the Lennon-McCartney shadow. Yet freedom didn't mean peace. Even as his solo career soared, Harrison didn't fully distance himself from his former bandmates. He lent his talents to Ringo Starr and even collaborated with Lennon. But those early post-Beatles years were far from easy. The trio soon discovered that McCartney's warnings about manager Alan Klein were painfully accurate. The man was more interested in profit than partnership. Between draining business meetings and emotional fallout, Harrison sought sanctuary where he always had, in his music. His next album, Living in the Material World, offered a gentler landing after the monumental All Things Must Pass. But the universe wasn't done testing him. He endured the chaos of organizing the concert for Bangladesh, only to have his marriage crumble as Pattie Boyd fell for Eric Clapton. To make matters worse, his health began to falter. He lost his voice during the recording of Dark Horse, and critics showed no mercy, savaging both the album and the accompanying tour. The man once revered for his spiritual calm suddenly sounded exhausted by life itself. Extra Texture tried to pick up the pieces, showing flashes of warmth beneath the melancholy. Still, between late nights in Los Angeles and stinging reviews from Rolling Stone, which he directly referenced in song, Harrison's frustration was palpable. He wasn't just defending his music, he was defending his very identity. It became obvious that the bright lights and endless parties of LA were draining him of the peace he had spent years searching for. In that sense, his return to England was nothing short of salvation. Much like David Bowie fled Los Angeles chaos for Berlin, Harrison escaped to Friar Park, his grand home and spiritual refuge. There he rediscovered the joy of simply making music again. The result was 33 1/3, an album that glowed with humor and relief. Songs like This Song, a cheeky jab at the plagiarism lawsuit, Over My Sweet Lord, and the whimsical Crackerbox Palace reflected a man rediscovering playfulness after years of turmoil. By the time he released his self-titled George Harrison album, the transformation was complete. Gone was the weary cynic. In his place stood an artist at peace with himself. Reflecting on that period, Harrison once said that between 33 1/3 and George Harrison, his life had finally begun to settle. "Everything's been happening nice for me," he explained. "My life is getting better all the time, and I'm happy, and I think that's reflected in the music." While the George Harrison album might not have carried the same raw power as Wah Wah or Let It Down, it radiated a quiet confidence and optimism that made it one of his most consistent works. Songs like Here Comes the Moon and Love Comes to Everyone shimmered with warmth, leaving listeners with the same gentle glow Harrison himself seemed to feel while recording them. In tone and texture, it was perhaps the most relaxed record any Beatle ever made, a sun-drenched blend of soft rock and serene reflection, closer to yacht rock than psychedelic rebellion. Yet far from feeling lightweight, it carried the grace of someone who had finally learned to breathe again. Harrison was still years away from the triumphant return of Cloud 9, but with George Harrison, he no longer sounded like a man burdened by expectations. Each track felt like an embrace, simple, sincere, and deeply human. After years of spiritual searching, heartbreak, and self-doubt, George had finally found what he'd been chasing all along, a reason to smile.